Jace Morgan sat alone in his ship as it floated in deep space, with stars glowing outside like small fires and silence all around him, like a blanket of nothing. His ship, the Wanderer, had not seen another soul in weeks, maybe months, and time felt like water slipping through his fingers. He had no destination, no orders, just the freedom to roam where no one else dared. He had fought in wars before on the edge of human space against machines and beasts and even things without names, but those days were over now. At least he hoped they were now. He searched for old signals, lost ruins, and strange places where he could feel like he still mattered in a galaxy that had moved on. On this day, just like many before it, he picked up a weak signal, a whisper from a dead planet called Zarakai. It was marked red on every map, which meant danger or worse, but the voice in the signal did not sound dangerous. It sounded tired and scared and broken. "Help us," it said over and over in a language that was old, but not forgotten. "Help us, we are still here, please, we are still here." Jay sat still for a long time, listening to the message play again and again. Something in it pulled at his chest like a hand made of sorrow. The voice was not human, but it was close enough to understand, and behind the words he could hear pain, he could hear hope, and he knew what he had to do. He turned the ship towards Arakai and fired up the engines. Space twisted around him like glass bending in heat as he jumped through the stars toward the planet that should have been empty. Zarakai looked like a dying ember from orbit, a ball of ash wrapped in angry clouds, with lightning dancing across its surface and giant cracks splitting its land like old wounds that never healed. No human ship had gone near it in over 50 years, not since the Great Collapse, when the Zarakai vanished from the galaxy like smoke and wind. But someone was still alive down there, someone who kept sending the same message over and over and over. Jace did not wait. He brought the Wanderer into the upper skies, where storms screamed, and tried to tear the wings off his ship. Lightning flashed so close he could smell burnt metal even through the walls of the cockpit. Alarms blared, red lights blinked, but he held the controls tight and pushed forward into the storm, into the chaos. Finally, after what felt like hours, the ship broke through the clouds, and he saw the ground, a wasteland of black stone, twisted trees, and shattered towers rising like broken teeth from the earth. It looked like the bones of a great beast left to rot in the sun, but near the center of it all stood a tall spire, still glowing faintly with blue light, like a single eye refusing to shut. He landed near the spire, careful not to crush anything living. If anything still lived, he put on his suit, grabbed his pulse rifle, and stepped outside. The air was thick and heavy and smelled like burned wires and old dust. He walked slowly toward the spire, eyes sharp, ears open, heart steady. The doors opened before he touched them. They moved on their own, sliding apart with a hiss of old air, and inside the air was clean. The walls were smooth and silver, with lines of soft light running through them like veins. It was warm, too, not like the cold world outside. Then they appeared. 3 figures, tall and thin, with glowing skin that shimmered like moonlight, stepped forward. They had large black eyes and long arms, and their faces showed no fear, only sadness, deep and endless sadness. One of them spoke in a voice like wind through glass. "You came," it said. "You heard us, and you came. We thought you never would." Jace lowered his rifle slowly and nodded. "Yes, I heard you," he said, "and I came." They told him they were the last of their kind, only 12 left in the entire world. Their people had been killed not by war, but by something worse, a sickness that came from the sky, poisoned the air, and ate their lungs. Their bodies could not fight it, their machines could not stop it, and their hope had faded with each passing moon. Only one thing had kept them alive, a single dream, that someone out there would hear their cry, someone would come. And Jace had come. He looked around the strange room at the dying lights and the tired faces, and he knew, without being told, that he could not leave them. Not now, not ever. He would help them, he would save them, or he would die trying. As the doors closed behind him, the spire rose higher into the storm, like a finger pointing to the stars, and the message that had played for so long finally fell silent. Because someone had... Jay stood among the last of the Zarakai, their glowing eyes fixed on him, like stars caught in still water. Their faces showed peace, but also deep cracks of pain and long years of waiting. The tall one, who spoke first, stepped closer. Her name was Ilarii, and her voice echoed softly through the hall, like a memory being remembered. She thanked him again for answering the call, even though they had stopped believing long ago that anyone would come. The spire they lived in was called the Heart Tower, built before even the oldest Zarakai could remember. It was powered by the pulse of the planet itself, and kept a small area around it warm and breathable. The rest of the world was choking under dark skies and thick clouds filled with poison, but this place still held life. Jace could feel it under his boots, like a weak heartbeat, trying not to fade. They took him through the halls of the spire, past rooms filled with strange lights and machines that no longer worked, past murals drawn in light that showed stories of beauty and war and things that had names Jace could not speak. They showed him the chambers where the young ones had once grown and where the old ones now rested in silence, and they told him that the sickness had touched everything, every root, every breath, every moment. The Zarakai believed the sickness came not by chance, but by choice. They told him of the sky burners, a rival species that once shared this corner of the galaxy with them, beings of fire and metal who hated the way the Zarakai sang to their planet and shaped it with peace instead of power. The sky burners wanted control, and when they lost the war, they returned not with weapons, but with something worse. They changed the air itself with clouds of nanodust, too small to see but strong enough to twist. The very breath of the world. Jace listened without speaking much. His eyes wandered to the walls, to the flickering lights, to the sadness in their movements. He had seen death before. He had seen planets crack in war and cities fall into flame, but never had he seen a species fade in slow silence like this. At last Illyrii brought him to a chamber unlike the others, wide and bright, with a circular table made of glowing stone at its center. Around the edge were chairs made from crystal shaped like petals, and behind each one stood a Zarakai figure, old and graceful, like statues ready to speak. The high circle Illyrii whispered, their leaders, their wisdom keepers and memory holders. They have waited long for this moment. They will ask you now for your answer. Jace stepped into the light and stood before the circle. His boots echoed slightly on the smooth floor, and then the oldest of the Zarakai raised his hand and spoke, his voice dry and low like wind in the cracks of a canyon. You have come from the stars to this place where life fades and hope thins. We ask not just for your strength, but for your bond. We ask for your will to tie with ours and save what remains. Jace frowned but nodded slowly and asked what they meant by bond and what they needed him to do. He was ready to help, ready to give what he could, but he wanted to understand. The answer came gently but with great weight. The systems that once protected the air and filtered the sky had shut down over years of neglect. The machines were too complex for the Zarakai to repair alone, and only someone with a different mind, someone not shaped by their way of thinking, could reawaken them. The machines were built with logic and art mixed together, something close to the way humans build and solve. They believed he was the key, not just any human, but him, the one who answered the call, the one who braved the storm, the one who walked into their dying world without asking what was in it for him. Jace looked at the table, then at their faces. He felt something stir inside his chest, not pride, not fear, something heavier, something like purpose. He agreed. He told them he would help fix their systems and bring their sky back if it could be done. He would not promise miracles, but he would not walk away either. The circle bowed their heads, and Illyrii touched his shoulder, gently, her skin cool and soft like moonlight against his suit. She thanked him not with words, but with a look that stayed in his mind, even as she led him away to the lower levels, where the core machines waited. They descended deep below the Heart Tower, into the belly of the spire, where the walls grew darker, and the air hummed with energy. The machines down there were silent giants, built into the rock itself, made of smooth black metal and pale light tubes that pulsed faintly like dying stars. Jace moved among them, studying the designs, the shapes, the patterns. He spoke to his ship's AI through a wrist link and scanned the systems slowly, carefully. Some parts were dead, some were damaged, some were just asleep, waiting for the right voice to call them back. He worked for hours, maybe days. He lost track of time in the darkness, his hands black with dust, his eyes tired but sharp. He rerouted wires, he recharged cells, he rewrote old commands using human code where Zarakai logic failed. And slowly the light returned. One by one the machines began to hum again, like an orchestra waking from silence. They lit up in rows and columns, each one sending power through the veins of the tower and up into the clouds above. Illyrii came to him, Then, with news, the air outside the spire had begun to clear just a little, but enough to see the stars again. For the first time in years, they had seen the stars. The Zarakai gathered once more in the high chamber to witness what they called the first breath, a moment when their world began to heal, and when they believed their savior had truly come. Jay stood among them as they sang a low, soft melody that filled the room with warmth and peace. He did not understand the words, but he felt them in his bones, and he knew this was more than thanks, this was trust. Then the high circle spoke again, and this time they said something strange, something Jace did not expect. You have done what no other could, and for this our law is clear. The one who saves the heart must be joined to the line that leads our people forward. Jace tilted his head, unsure of what they meant, and Illyria stepped forward with a small smile, her eyes glowing like soft crystal, and she spoke words that changed everything. The law of union, she said, the old bond between savior and heir, between the hands that fix and the heart that guides. The one who saves us must join with the one who leads us, and that one is the lay. From the side of the room a figure stepped forward, her steps quiet, her gaze strong, and her skin shining like water kissed by fire. Jace had seen her before, always watching, always silent, always near. Now she walked toward him with purpose, with calm, and with eyes that held no fear. And for the first time since he landed on this dead world, Jace Morgan felt something stir inside him that was not duty, not sorrow, not guilt, something like fate. Jace stood silent as the lay came closer, her eyes deep like a calm ocean under stars, her presence soft yet powerful, like a song that speaks without words. She stopped just in front of him, her head slightly tilted, her expression unreadable yet full of meaning. The room held its breath, and the Zarakai watched with stillness, like the moment was sacred, ancient, and sealed by time. The lay spoke at last, her voice smooth like silk over stone, her tone steady, as if she had practiced these words many times before. I am the lay, daughter of the line of stars, last heir of the heart tower. You came when we had only silence left. You gave our skies a second breath, and now by law and life I offer you my hand. Jace felt 1,000 thoughts rise and crash inside his mind. This was not what he came for, not what he planned, not what any human training had prepared him. For he looked around at the glowing figures, the circle of leaders, the silent witnesses, and back to the lay, who stood without fear, without question. He could have said no, he could have walked away, but something inside him whispered this moment mattered more than he understood, something deeper than law or custom, something old and unspoken. He stepped forward just enough for their shadows to touch, and gave a small nod, his voice low but certain. I accept. A hum spread through the room, like soft thunder underfoot, not sound, but energy. The air thickened with light. The spire itself seemed to react, as if it remembered this kind of moment from long ago, as if it welcomed the return of the old ways. The ceremony began with no warning, no long speeches, only movement and light. The lay reached for a crystal near the table, a small object shaped like a flame. She held it between them, and it opened slowly, revealing a thread of light that floated like smoke. She placed one end on his chest, just above the heart, and the other on hers, and the light connected them in a soft glow. Jace felt warmth spread through him, not just through skin, but through memory, through thought, like something was touching the edges of his soul, pulling threads of his life into a weave with hers. He saw flashes of her childhood, of her learning the songs of the wind, of her watching the skies for ships that never came, of her standing alone in the empty halls after each loss, of her hope never dying. She saw him too, saw the battles he fought, the friends he lost, the silence he carried like a scar, saw his choice to answer the call, not for glory, but because someone had to and no one else would. When the light faded, the bond was sealed, and the circle bowed their heads again. The deal was done, not just between Jace and the Zarakai, but between two hearts who never expected to find each other at the edge of a dying world. Later, as the room emptied and the songs faded, Jace sat beside the lay near one of the high windows, watching clouds shift across the recovering sky, the air still thick, but less cruel than before. She sat without speaking for a long time, and then finally turned to him and asked if he wanted to know the full truth. He looked at her face lit by pale blue light and nodded. She told him then that the sickness was still growing, still deeper than the machines could fix. It had spread not just through air, but through soil and sea and sky. It had touched the core of the planet where the ancient life systems lived, and those systems were now waking, but confused, wounded, and wild. To heal the world fully, someone had to go into the core, into the deep places, where no Zarakai could survive anymore. Too much damage, too much weakness. Only Jace, with his human lungs and blood, could go there. Only he could interface with the oldest part of the system. It would not be safe, it would not be easy, and he might not return. Jace listened without blinking, without flinching. The price was high, but he had never been one to run from hard roads. He asked what he needed to do, and the lay showed him. They traveled together to the outer edges of the city, where the land split like broken teeth, and ancient doors lay buried in black stone. Doors older than the tower, older than any Zarakai alive. Machines guarded them, twisted from centuries of decay. Half alive, half mad, Jace had to fight not with weapons, but with code, with logic, and instinct guiding the machines to open one final time. Behind the doors lay a path of light spiraling down into the planet's core, a tunnel of metal and memory, designed for those who once spoke with the world itself. The lay handed him a device shaped like a cube, its sides pulsing with light. "This will guide you," she said. "This will help you speak to the heart." He took it and looked at her, and in that moment the silence said more than any word could say. He walked into the tunnel alone, each step echoing into the deep, the path lit by the cube in his hand, showing symbols that danced and shifted like dreams. He felt the heat of the planet around him, not burning, but living like a giant creature, waiting in pain, waiting to be heard. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning as the tunnel twisted and narrowed and opened again, revealing vast chambers filled with lights like stars trapped in glass, and machines hanging like vines glowing with old power. Jace reached the core and stood before the heart engine, a sphere of light and shadow beating slowly. Like a sleeping heart it pulsed, weakly, each rhythm slower than the last, fading with every breath. He held up the cube, and the machine responded, lights flaring, sounds rising around him, like a voice waking from a nightmare. The cube connected to the core, and data flowed like rivers of fire through his mind, his vision blurred with images of storms and sky and sorrow, with pieces of code written in ways no human had ever seen. He focused, pushed back the pain, and began to fix what he could. Realign the paths, reconnect the flows, cleanse the air as piece by piece, like stitching wounds closed with words and numbers. And slowly the pulse grew stronger. Above the ground in the tower, the lay waited, her eyes on the skies, her heart beating in time with something far below. She could feel it even without seeing the connection between them, still warm, still alive. The Zarakai gathered again, not to witness, not to sing, just to wait, to hope, to believe. Then the clouds above cracked open just a little, and light poured through, golden and soft for the first time in decades. It touched the tower roof like a hand from a sky, and a breeze carried warmth instead of poison. And the tower sang. Not in words, not in voices, but in energy and harmony, in the vibration of stone and light, as the planet itself exhaled and welcomed life again. And somewhere deep below, Jace Morgan opened his eyes as the light of the heart engine wrapped around him, no longer flickering, no longer afraid. And the last thing he heard before sleep took him was a voice like Thaliai's, whispering through the light. "You paid the price." When Jace opened his eyes, the world felt different, quieter, but fuller, like the silence of a forest after a storm, where every drop of water, every leaf, every sound felt alive again. He lay on a soft bed made from glowing moss, inside a chamber shaped like a shell. Warm lights floated above him, like tiny moons dancing in slow spirals. The scent of clean air filled his lungs, and for the first time since landing on Zarakai, he could breathe without his helmet. The lay sat beside him, her fingers resting on his wrist, feeling the pulse of his heart, her eyes closed, as if listening to something deeper, something old. She opened them slowly when he stirred, and a soft smile touched her lips. "The bond is still strong," she said. "We felt it in the tower, when the skies opened, when the breath returned. The whole world felt it. You did not just fix the engine, Jace. You woke the heart of our world, and it knows your name now." He sat up slowly, every muscle aching, every breath heavy, but steady. He remembered the light, the codes, the feeling of being inside the core, not just physically, but with his mind his thoughts tangled with the ancient system that pulsed like a living memory. The cube was gone, now melted into the machine, or maybe into him. He could still feel a trace of its presence in his chest, like a second heartbeat. Ilaria entered the chamber, her robes shining like moonlight on water, and bowed gently. "We offer our thanks, not with words, but with truth," she said. "What you have done has given us a chance, not just to live, but to begin again. The sickness has weakened, the sky clears more each day, and the soil feels the change. But there is more you need to know, something we have not told any outsider, something tied to a promise made before your kind even walked the stars." Jace nodded and listened as Ilaria began to tell the story, not with pictures, not with sound, but through light, her hands moving in slow patterns, painting the air with glowing trails that formed shapes, scenes, people, and places that lived long before now. She showed him a time when the Zarakai were many, spread across 5 worlds, with towers that touched clouds and cities carved into crystal mountains. They shared knowledge through light and shaped their lives with harmony. But even then, there was fear of losing what they loved, fear of enemies who saw their peace as weakness. The sky burners were not the first, and they would not be the last. So the oldest minds of the Zarakai made a promise. They would create a fail-safe, a secret memory that would only awaken if their people faced true extinction, and in that memory they placed visions of stars, of ships of other species, and among them one stood out: the humans. Ilaria paused, letting the image of early human spaceflight linger in the air. Clumsy ships, with fire tails moving through black void, with more courage than sense. The Zarakai had watched them quietly, amazed by their spirit, their refusal to give up even when weak and lost. They saw something in humans that mirrored the Zarakai from long ago, and they made the promise, if ever the Zarakai were to fall, one of them would be joined with one of you to create something new, not as savior and saved, but as partners in rebuilding. Jace watched the vision fade as silence returned to the room. The meaning sank into his chest, heavy but clear. He was not chosen by chance. He was part of something planned long ago, a thread tied through time, waiting for the moment to be pulled. He turned to the Lay, whose eyes did not waver. She had known for some time, perhaps not everything, but enough, and she did not look at him like a prize or a tool, but as someone she had chosen to, not just by law, but by heart. "You were the last one who could come," she said, "but you came not to claim, not to conquer, but to understand. And that is why the bond formed true. That is why the core accepted you, and why the heart woke with your hand." Jace stood now, stronger though still tired, and looked out the open window at the sky that was no longer black and choking, but soft with silver clouds and pale light drifting across the horizon. Life had returned, not fully, but beginning again, like a flower cracking through stone. He walked with the Lay to the upper garden, a place once filled with dying vines and dry soil, now humming with color. The plants grew quickly, faster than they should, touched by the energy from the core below. Each leaf a promise, each bloom a sign that the planet itself was healing. They stood together in the center of the garden, and she reached into her robe and pulled out a small object, shaped like a star, sharp but glowing with warmth. It was the memory seal, a key to the Zarakai archives, the complete knowledge of their people kept hidden for ages, only shared through union and trust. She placed it in his hand, and he felt a surge of information, not words or images, but sensations, emotions, like walking through 1,000 lives at once. The struggles, the hopes, the mistakes, the victories. It was overwhelming, but not painful, more like walking through stories that now lived inside him too. "You carry us now," she said, "not as a burden, but as a bridge between our kind. And yours, your presence here means the Zarakai do not vanish. We move forward with you, with both of us." Jace looked at her and felt the truth in her words, not forced, not political, not strategic, just real, built from shared trial and quiet moments and decisions made when no one else was watching. Then the alarm sounded, low and distant, but sharp enough to pull the air tight around them. They turned toward the tower. As Ilaria ran toward them, her face no longer calm, but tense, her voice strong and urgent. "Ships in orbit, unknown signature, fast, and not responding to our hails," she said. "They do not match sky burners, but they carry weapons, and they are moving closer." Jace's breath caught, not in fear, but in realization. The light had returned, the signal had changed. Someone out there had seen it, maybe too many someones, and not all of them friendly. The galaxy was still wide and full of eyes. He turned to the Lay, who nodded once, and without another word they ran together, toward the tower, toward the future, toward whatever storm came next. Because now they stood it. The tower shifted with tension lights flickering across its walls like nervous breath as Jace and the Lay entered the command chamber, where glowing screens hovered in the air showing strange ships moving fast in low-orbit sleek black forms, without any known markings, their shape smooth like glass with sharp wings that cut through the clouds like blades of shadow. The Zarakai elders gathered quickly, speaking in tones that carried no panic, only sharp awareness. Ilarii raised her hand, and the chamber grew quiet, her eyes fixed on the largest ship as it hovered above the heart spire, unmoving, yet watching like a predator circling prey. "They are not ours," she said, "and they are not old enemies. Either we do not know who they are, but they have not responded to our message, and that silence speaks loudly." Jay stepped forward, his fingers curling into fists. He had seen ships like this before, not these exactly, but the kind that moved without care, the kind that came not to talk, but to take, the kind that followed rumors of life, like wolves chasing scent through the void. The Lay looked at him, and something in her eyes changed, not fear, not anger, but a slow rising certainty, like a decision, waking up after years asleep. She turned to the circle, and spoke with a voice that carried weight, more than her age, more than her title. She said, "The time to hide has passed. If they come seeking control, they will find more than dust." Ilarii nodded and motioned to the guardians at the wall, who activated the outer defense matrix. A system long asleep, now buzzing with sudden energy. Towers rose from the stone around the city, humming with low blue light. Energy fields wrapped the central zones like thin veils of glass, prepared to hold back whatever storm approached. Jace watched it all unfold with the soldiers, reading the movement, the preparation, the tension. He could feel the pressure in the air, like before a battle not yet begun, but already breathing down their necks. But something else was rising too, not just threat, not just fear, but a whisper inside his thoughts, a question, not yet asked, a door, not yet opened. The Lay pulled him aside to a small chamber hidden behind the central archive, a room lined with ancient walls carved in silver script glowing faintly with soft gold. Light. The air inside was heavy, not with dust, but with something older, like memory hanging in the silence. "There is something you must know," she said, "something I have carried all my life, something not even the elders fully understand." She raised her hand and drew a symbol in the air, and the wall before them shifted, revealing a chamber filled with light, and in its center a crystal basin, floating in the air, surrounded by rings of fire and mist. Inside the basin was blood, not red, not blue, but gold, and it pulsed like a small living heart. "This is the source blood," she said, "the first blood of the first line, kept hidden, because it holds power, not just memory, not just healing, but connection to the core of our world and beyond." Jace stepped closer, feeling the heat from the basin, not like flame, but like breath, steady and warm and full of life. He looked at the Lay and saw that same gold shimmer in the lines of her skin, in the glow of her veins. "I was born with it," she said, "not by design, but by chance, by fate. I do not know if I was meant to be this, or if the world chose me, because it had no one else. But I carry it, and it speaks to me in dreams and moments of stillness. It shows me things not yet happened, and sometimes things that never will." She looked at him now with eyes that carried both burden and hope, and said, "The ships above us do not come by mistake. They follow the same signal. You followed the same light, the same breath of the world reborn. And if they take me, they take the source. And if they take the source, they take the future of every Zarakai alive." Jace felt the weight of her words settle in his chest like stone and fire together. He knew then that this fight was not just for peace or survival, but for something deeper, something tied to the very roots of what made this world live. The screens in the command chamber blinked red as the enemy ships began to descend, silent, still, but closer, faster, like arrows, and when the first touched down outside the city walls, its wings folding inward as legs extended to the ground, black soldiers stepped out, no faces, just helmets, no names, just movement. They walked forward without fear, without hesitation, without a single word. The Zarakai guardians held their ground, forming a shield wall of energy and crystal, ready to stop them if they crossed the line. But the air between both sides was heavy with the question of who would move first. Jay stepped through the barrier, walking past the guards, past the line, past the silence, and stood before the strangers, his hands empty, but his stance firm. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice loud and clear. "What do you want with this place?" The leader of the strangers stepped forward, his voice cold and mechanical, like static, pretending to be speech. "We come for the core, the power. We detect the life. We observe. We claim this place by right of discovery." Jace's jaw clenched, and he stepped closer, his eyes burning not with rage, but with warning. "This place is not lost. This world is not dead. You did not discover anything. You arrived late and loud and wrong." The soldier tilted his head as if thinking, and said, "Then we take what we need by force and leave no one to remember." In that moment the choice was clear. The silence shattered. The lay raised her hand, and the sky answered with light. The towers fired beams of energy across the walls, striking the soldiers with blinding bursts of force. The ground shook with impact, the air filled with sound and fury, and the battle began. Jace moved like fire through shadow, his rifle humming with blue heat, every shot sharp and true, his body a machine of purpose, not rage, not hate, just resolve pure and full. The lay fought beside him, not with guns, but with power, her hands glowing with golden light as she bent energy around their enemies, shields failing against the will of her blood. The invaders fell one by one, not expecting the strength of a world reborn, not expecting the fury of a people with something left to fight. For the last ship tried to lift off, tried to flee, but the sky closed around it, with lightning drawn from the tower itself, and it shattered and flame above the spire. When the dust settled, the land stood quiet again, broken but unbent. The Zarakai gathered in silence, breathing deep the new air, their eyes on the sky, where sunlight now touched every tower, every stone, every face. The lay walked to Jace, her steps slow, her breath heavy but sure, and said, "They came for what lives in me, but they did not know I am not alone anymore." And Jace took her hand, feeling the pulse of golden fire within her, within the world, and now within him too. They had saved this place together, but what waited in the stars might be greater. The winds that swept across Zarakai no longer carried the scent of decay. They now brought warmth from skies reborn, light from stars long hidden, and whispers of life waking slowly from ancient sleep. The clouds that once choked the skies had begun to break, and with them came a new age, a fragile age, one balanced on choices still to come. But peace did not last. Jay stood at the edge of the highest tower, watching a horizon that seemed calm, yet pulsing with energy. The battle with the unknown invaders had left scars on the land, but it had also revealed something far more dangerous, something watching from beyond, not the sky burners, not scavengers, but something older, something patient, something that had seen the golden blood in the lay and recognized its value. They had seen the light that rose when the core awoke, the same light that called Jace from deep space, the same signal that had stretched across stars like a voice echoing through time and space. And now others had heard it too, and they were coming. The lay joined him, her presence calm, but her eyes alert. She knew the signs, knew the feeling of a storm before it broke. She spoke quietly, "The enemy is not new. They are not strangers. They are the old ones." The first silence. Jace turned to her, his expression shifting from focus to confusion. He had never heard that name before. The first silence sounded like a myth, like something told around campfires to scare children. But the lay explained. Long ago, before the Zarakai spread across stars, before they built towers, before they touched the core, there were others who ruled the dark. They were not conquerors of planets, but of voices. They moved from system to system, not with weapons, but with silence. They absorbed life, drained it of sound, of thought, of light. They left behind only emptiness. And when the Zarakai first found them, they ran. But running was never enough. The first silence did not chase out of rage or hunger, but out of design. They believed all life should return to the void from which it came, and when they saw a species like the Zarakai, they saw a mistake, something loud, in a universe meant to be still. Now the signal from the awakened core had called to them again, like a beacon, like a challenge. And they were coming fast. Ilarii confirmed the arrival of unknown vessels near the outer edge of the system. No signals, no warnings, just movement pure and constant, closing the distance with every passing moment. The tower went into full preparation. Shields reinforced, weapons charged, the city transformed into a fortress of light and stone. Every guardian took position, Every elder offered their guidance, and Jace stood at the center, not as an outsider, not as a visitor, but as part of the living shield that would protect this world. He entered the chamber of battle, the place where old warriors once stood, where plans were drawn, where wars were won or lost. The chamber was alive with motion, glowing maps showing space and layers, lines shifting as ships approached like waves crashing against the shore. The lay stood beside him, wearing armor made from living crystal shaped to her body by energy from the core, her eyes bright, her blood burning with golden light. She was not afraid. She was not uncertain. She was ready. Jace wore a suit built by both Zarakai tech and human knowledge, woven with flexible metal, reinforced with shield generators, powered by the same bond that linked him to the core. He held a rifle shaped by his hand, and mind forged in the forges of the tower, tuned to his rhythm, his breath, his will. The first silence arrived in the black of night. The ships were not ships, but shapes, without form, vast dark bodies that moved like smoke, with edges that cut the stars. They did not speak. They did not ask. They simply began to fall upon the world like shadows made of hunger. The first impact shook the outer rim. Towers crumbled, energy fields flared. The Zarakai held the line, but the silence flowed around their defenses, slipping through gaps like water, through cracks, each one moving, without sound, without light, only touch, and that touch brought stillness, brought death. Jace led the counterstrike, moving with speed and purpose. His rifle sang with every shot, beams of energy, slicing the void, burning through the dark forms, forcing them back. His mind linked to the core through his bond with the lay, gave him an edge. He saw their movements before they happened, felt their intent like whispers trying to dig into his mind. The lay moved like light through water, golden arcs flowing from her hands, striking the shadows with force that came not from muscle, but from memory, from history, from pain and promise. She called to the core, and the planet answered with waves of power, rising from the soil, blasting into the sky, creating shields of sound and light that forced the silence to pull back. But the enemy did not retreat. They adapted with each wave. They grew faster. They changed shape. They found ways to reach deeper into the system, trying to touch the heart of the world, where the source blood flowed, where the spark of Zarakai life burned bright. Jace made a choice, one that could not be reversed. He opened a path directly into the core chamber, not to expose it, but to draw the enemy there, to fight them, where he was strongest, where the bond was pure, where the light could fight back. He stood in the chamber, surrounded by floating rings of energy, the heart engine pulsing in time with his breath. The lay joined him, her presence giving strength, anchoring his soul, as the enemy poured into the chamber, black waves crawling across the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. And then the world fought back. The core lit with golden fire pulsing out in rings of power. The chamber became a sun within the earth, and the dark shapes screamed without sound, their bodies twisting, breaking, vanishing into light. Jace felt his body burn with energy, not pain, but purpose, like every part of him was being reforged into something more, something meant for this moment. Thaliai's voice rose in harmony with the core, singing a song older than memory, calling the past and future into one breath. And in that moment the shadows cracked, not from force, but from unity, from the bond between a human and a Zarakai, from the promise that life could rise even from silence. The last of the first silence broke apart above the planet, scattered into the void, not destroyed, but banished, no longer able to hold their shape in the presence of a world awakened. And when the light faded, when the chamber returned to calm, Jace stood at the center, breathing deep, his body glowing faintly, his eyes filled with stars. The lay took his hand, and for a moment the entire planet seemed to breathe with them, as if it too had survived. But they both knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The stars above Zarakai now shone without fear. The sky, once scarred by fire, now glowed with peace, not the peace of silence, but the peace earned through sacrifice, through unity, through light that refused to die. Jace stood beneath that sky, looking up, not as a stranger, not as a soldier, not even as a hero, but as something far more unexpected, something he had never imagined he would become. He was a husband. The ceremony was unlike anything in human tradition. It was not bound by words or rituals, not by contracts or paper. It was shaped by energy, by memory, by connection, woven in threads only two souls could see. The Zarakai did not marry in the way humans did. They bonded through a ritual of light. through sharing of core essence, through the joining of minds and hearts across the space between worlds. The lay led him into the Temple of Echoes, where the voices of past leaders still lived within the walls, each whisper, preserved in crystal each breath, carried on the wind of memory. The chamber pulsed with energy, not loud, not violent, but steady like the heartbeat of the planet itself, the place where life first awakened, where the golden blood first rose, where the first vow was spoken before even time knew how to measure it. Jace felt the weight of the place not as a burden, but as a reminder that he was not here by chance. He had not come to Zarakai by accident. He had been called by something deeper than logic, something older than gravity, something woven into his bones since the day he was born. The lay approached him, her skin glowing faintly, her eyes full of warmth and fire, and ancient knowing. She reached out and took his hand, not as a gesture of possession, but as a promise, a bridge between what was and what could be. She did not ask him to stay, she knew he already had. They stepped onto the platform of unity, where the light of the core rose in gentle pulses, each wave passing through them, reading them, measuring their truth. The ritual had begun. Jace closed his eyes and allowed the core to read his heart. It saw his pain, his fear, his failures, but it also saw his love, his loyalty, his courage, his willingness to give without asking, to protect without needing to be asked, to carry a world not his and call it home. The light turned gold, then white, then settled into a soft, warm glow, and in that glow the lay spoke the vow. She promised not just herself, but her people, to share all they were, to give not only love, but memory, to give not only presence, but future. She promised that he would never be alone, never be forgotten, never be left behind, for in their way, forgetting someone was the only true death. Jay spoke no words, but his soul answered, and the core heard it, and it accepted it. And in that moment a bond was formed, not just between two beings, but between two worlds, between Earth and Zarakai, between human and guardian, between past and what would come next. When they stepped from the chamber, hand in hand, the sky welcomed them with a gentle rain, not water, but falling light, soft particles that danced in the air, each one a blessing from the world itself, each one whispering, "You are one now, you are whole." The people of Zarakai gathered not as subjects, but as kin. They sang not in language, but in tone harmonies that wrapped around the mountains, that echoed through the towers, that reached even into the stars, where distant satellites still watched, still listening to a story no one on Earth yet understood. Ilarii stood at the front, holding the staff of balance, the symbol of those who guide and protect. She bowed to Jace and called him not guest, not warrior, but husband of a people, guardian of memory, brother of light. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from joy, a joy she never believed she would feel again after the old wars, after the long silence, after all the loss she had endured. Jace smiled, not the smile of victory, but of understanding, for he knew now what it meant to belong, to carry the story of others inside his own breath, to become more than a man, to become a thread in the fabric of a species who had once lost everything. That night the fires burned high, not for mourning, but for celebration. Food was shared, stories were told, even the youngest children danced beneath the stars. And when Jace sat beside the lay watching it all, he leaned close and whispered a question that had lived in his heart since the beginning. "Why me?" The lay did not laugh, she did not dismiss him. She simply touched his chest and answered softly, "Because you listened, because you chose to help when no one forced you to, because you reached into our darkness and gave us light, and because love does not always begin in comfort. Sometimes it begins in chaos and grows in the quiet after the storm." Jace took her hand again, and this time he did not let go. In the weeks that followed, he learned the rhythms of Zarakai life. He helped rebuild towers, shaped by his own designs, fused with Earth engineering and Zarakai living tech. He taught the young ones how to build using both mind and hand. He told them stories of Earth, stories of oceans and deserts and snow, stories of music that made hearts rise, stories of people who fought and fell and stood up again. He was no longer just a visitor, no longer just a survivor. He was a builder, now a father of a new age. The council offered him a position not of command, but of trust, a keeper of the bridge between species, the one who would speak for both human and Zarakai when the stars brought others, when new voices rose, when peace had to be defended not with weapons, but with wisdom. And Jace accepted, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because he believed the future was worth it. One morning long after the last fires of war had faded, he stood again at the edge of the highest tower. The laid beside him her presence, still like gravity, still like light in the distance. Ships from Earth approached, cautiously uncertain, still afraid, but curious, drawn by the same signal that had once pulled Jace across the void. He would greet them, he would tell them everything. He would not hide the war or the loss, or the strange beginning. He would tell them the truth, that peace was possible, that hope could grow in burnt soil, that love could come from the most unexpected gift. And somewhere behind him in the city a child laughed for the first time, and it echoed through the towers, and it reached the stars. And Jace smiled again, this time not as the last of anything, but as the first human to find home not on Earth, but among the stars. The husband of a people, the beginning of something new.